Prost.
Senna.
Prost.
Senna.
Prost.
Senna.
Doesn't matter who was faster in 1988. You can be the fastest by hitting that subscribe button and joining us here at the Audrain Museum Network. Do it right now.
Right here.
Hi, and welcome to the Audrain Automobile Museum and our exhibition, The Magic of Monaco. Today we're going to take a slightly deeper dive and go off tangent, because that's what we do best, about two of the more modern Formula One cars in this exhibition, this 1988 McLaren Honda MP44 and a 1997 Ferrari F310B. Now, both these cars are so incredibly significant in the history of Formula One, and also they've got great Monaco connections as well. Of course, I also want to take this moment to correct an error that I made. Egregious error.
You made an error?
I made an error. I thought I had made an error before, but I was wrong.
Take notes, people.
In the introduction video for this exhibition, I stated, of course, that the Red Bull RB20 was the winningest Formula One car in history, and of course it was the RB19, not the RB20, which, fortunately for me, a Ferrari and McLaren fan, proved eminently beatable this season. Thank you very much. But this car that we're standing next to had held the record from 1988 to 2023. What do we have here, Ben?
This is, to me, the most iconic Formula One car of all time, and I'm very glad you introduced it as a McLaren followed by Honda, because without the Honda, this wouldn't have been possible for the McLaren team. This car is the product of when you have the best designers in the world with advanced aerodynamics of the time and the best engineers of the time as well. And that recipe really allowed McLaren to absolutely dominate in 1988. This technology was used with other teams. This turbocharged Honda engine was essentially used by other teams, but McLaren was able to pair it with this body that was so much slipperier than anyone else, and also with two of the best drivers, of course, in the world, in Audrain Prost and Audrain Senna.
It's also very interesting because we often have conversations about modern Formula One and the changing of the engine regulations and how that affects performance. This is also, to me, such an interesting story because the FIA has always been trying to slow cars down ever since Formula One started. And in an effort to slow the turbo cars down, they said for 1989, they're going to ban the turbo cars, they're going to go back to naturally aspirated engines, and so they put all sorts of limits on these, the amount of fuel they could take, the level of boost they could run, said we're going to slow them down. Ha! They didn't quite manage to do it with this.
No, they weren't, and McLaren was able to overcome those kind of sandbagging rules, and we're still able to dominate, with this platform. And this is such a great era of cars because, for one, you can still start it with a key. You warm the oil, you warm the tires, you have a key, you start the car. Not the same with the Ferrari. That's when all the computers came into play. But this car was able to perform so well, and of course, we're very familiar with that clip of Audrain Senna at Monaco in 1988 in this sister car. Just driving, it seemed like with his mind. There was no real thought process, it seemed. He was just going with his guts and driving so perfectly, of course, until, he made a mistake later in the race. Well,
it's one of those things that both Senna and Prost said that this car was one of the best cars they ever drove in their careers because it was a car that they felt very comfortable in and could really push to the limit and slightly beyond, with great confidence. And of course, this particular chassis was driven by Alain Prost to 3 second places and 3 first places, including, of course, at Monaco. How he got the first place doesn't really matter, but nonetheless, this car won the Monaco Grand Prix. And it's also very interesting thinking about technology and where technology had progressed by this time in Formula One. These cars are putting out about 650 horsepower. This is the first time Formula One Grand Prix cars had gotten back to the power that the auto unions put out in 1937. And so, again, realizing that you always want to sort of slow things down, they were there. Plus, one of the things that I really love about this era, and I remember this being a kid, that this is the time of qualifying engines. And so this put out 650 horsepower. A qualifying engine might put out 1,000 horsepower.
Yeah.
And to think about that in terms of the modern cost cap, it's like people built engines for qualifying.
Yeah, yeah, and it's amazing to think about because, as we've talked about with other cars, we're so familiar with turbocharged cars and engines today. And even in the gallery today, people will come in and say, well, kids aren't into cars anymore. It's like, well, we're not sitting in our garages, you know, wrenching under our cars when it's 30 degrees at night, but now we have a phone app that can take, for example, my turbocharged BMW and add 50 horsepower if the company downloads a new tune. So McLaren and Honda were doing the same thing 40 years ago, and we're able to really add boost or add fuel and change these different tuning aspects of the car, you know, without reinventing the wheel like a V10 engine. It's not as easy to add that kind of power with a naturally aspirated engine. So this was really, you know, the first era of tuning, in my opinion. You know, and you look at the rally cars we talked about in the other video, but these cars were so capable of handling the power, and the chassis and the drivers could handle them as well.
And it's also worth noting the fact that turbocharging was legal in the FIA rules, but nobody used it because they thought it's too wasteful, the turbo lag will be too dangerous, and so nobody really started to perfect it until this period of time. And even then, once the engineers got the hang of it, the cars became so fast and so powerful that they also had a problem with ground effects during this time as well, the turbo engines, and they couldn't have turbo engines and ground effects at the same time because that was too much. And it's amazing. The other thing, which I just have to bring up because I'm me, is the fact that so many Formula One fans today complain about the sound of the V6 engines.
Right.
No one complained about the sound of this V6 engine.
No one did at all. And you know, part of the aspects is the anti-lag system that this car uses, which was an early kind of adaptation of that, and it just allowed the car to stay in boost. But it also, of course, created great sounds, turbocharger noises, etc. But this was a ballistic car. And like you said, the turbocharging technology did come a long way since the Can-Am days where drivers were entering a corner, left foot braking, flooring the gas to rev up the turbo, so by the time they exited the corner, they were out of there. But these cars had none of that, and there was a lot of advancement in those 15 years since Can-Am.
A few years ago, I had the great fortune to be at the Goodwood Festival of Speed. And this car was there on display by the Audrain, and I got to interview the two McLaren drivers of the time, Daniel Ricciardo and Lando Norris. And they were fascinated with this car and with what the drivers had to do in these cars. Powerful, quick, much lighter than the cars that they were driving, and the fact that you had to, shift with your right hand.
Yeah.
So, you know, you think about the accomplishments of drivers like Prost and Senna at Monaco in this car. Basically, they drove half the lap with one hand.
Yeah. It was a full-time job, as Jay says about some cars, to drive this, and it's really remarkable, and it's amazing. I didn't go to the Festival of Speed, but the stories I heard from our team were that this car got so much attention because to true fans, this really is the holy grail. But by any means, it was not easy to pilot. It's really a handful.
It's absolutely astonishing, and again, it's so thrilling to have this car in the Audrain collections and part of this exhibition, The Magic of Monaco, because this is magic, this is Monaco.
This is a car where people ask me, well, why should I be a member of the museum? If I was not working here, I would be here every single day just drooling around this car.
It's amazing. Now, we're going to take a look at our other feature car for today's video, a car that is really interesting and really important to the history of Formula One, for totally different reasons. Let's go to Ferrari land.
Well said.
So, Ben, we are here now with a Ferrari. And it's quite interesting, actually, that given the last Formula One season, when Ferrari and McLaren really rediscovered their mojo, McLaren won the Constructors' Championship for the first time since 2018, I believe. And Ferrari came in second, pushing Red Bull down to third. And so we've got two great rivals right here in the gallery. And this 1997 Ferrari F310B is a really historic Ferrari Formula One car. It represents so much of what Jean Todt came in 1994 to rebuild Ferrari. And with his team eventually of Rory Byrne and Ross Brawn and Schumacher, went on to just be the dominant force in Formula One. They weren't yet the dominant force in 1997. Mm-hmm. And, but we were talking about the great engine technology in the McLaren Honda MP44. This is the glorious V10 era.
Yeah, when you hear all of the casual Formula One fans talk about, well, it's not the same without the noise. This is the noise that those casuals are referring to. And, you know, through the years, technology will evolve and, you know, cars will grow and shrink and do all these crazy things that the FIA demands them to do. But this, to me, is the peak of the era. It's the peak of everything that everyone loves about Formula One.
It is the time when I first started going to Formula One races. And I remember quite vividly, and probably this is one of the reasons why I can't hear today, that it was always a rule with us, the friends that I went with, was that when the cars first came out on track to do their installation laps, you did not wear your earplugs. You wanted to hear that sound. You wanted it to rip through your brain.
Right.
And then you put the earplugs in because otherwise it would be unbearable.
Yeah.
You'd listen to this, you'd watch the support races and you think that they were electric cars after the Formula One cars because they made no noise.
Right.
It was quite astonishing. And this car is an interesting one for a couple of reasons. Michael Schumacher, this is intended to be his car. He drove it in practice at Spa, mm-hmm. and he didn't really like it. This is an evolution of the F310, mm-hmm. and he sort of liked the original F310 more. Plus, it rained. There's a wonderful picture in the gallery mm-hmm. of Michael in the F310 in the rain, mm-hmm. and almost in honor of that, our car here in the gallery is wearing rain tires.
Mm-hmm, of course.
But the forecast looks clear right now. So, it is something that has to be remembered that Ferrari at this time was really building an organization all around Schumacher. Mm-hmm. And what Michael wanted, Michael got. Absolutely. And so Eddie Irvine ended up driving this car in 2 Formula One races, did very well at Monza, had a crash in Austria when he was still doing very well. But this is a car that really so you could see the groundwork for the domination to come.
Yeah, absolutely. And like you said, Schumacher wasn't a huge fan of this. He did end up working with the car, of course, and kind of came about it as the season went on. But this era, in 1997, things were becoming a bit more automated, right? So you have a hand clutch to get going. You have paddle shifters. You have all your information on the steering wheel, all the readouts and your buttons and everything, almost like your modern, Ferrari Roma steering wheel. You have all this stuff happening right at your fingertips, where just 9 years prior, it was incredibly analog. This came a long way.
Steering wheel, gear shift, engine.
Foot clutch, that's it.
Right.
And you were really, muscling the car around. This car, bit longer, a bit higher, a bit bigger, was a lot more stable than, the Audrain Senna seemingly drift videos around Monaco with one hand that you mentioned earlier. But Ferrari had come a long way. And like you said, Jean Todt had really progressed the brand. And, Ferrari was obviously, drawing a lot of attention to their F1 team, which obviously was translating to sales. The 355 is coming out at this point, which has that F1 gearbox, which of course at the time was so advanced. But you're right, it come a long way. And, Michael Schumacher didn't love this car, but it still saw pretty good success, I'll say, throughout the 97 season. I'll let you finish that thought.
It did indeed. Right before we get there,
yeah.
as the GPS says, in 2.5 miles, don't go there.
Yeah.
But we're going to go there.
Yeah.
But it's also interesting, and in a slightly sad, but actually ultimately good and beneficial note, the 1988 McLaren Honda MP44 is a very narrow car. you just referenced the fact that the F310B is a much wider car. And a lot of that had to do with the changes that they made after Ayrton Senna's fatal accident. They made the cockpit area wider to have more protection for the driver. And also they put the side sections of the driver's cockpit higher, again, for additional protection, which unfortunately also limited vision for some drivers, but you know, you get some, you lose some. But this car took Schumacher to second in the championship, just behind Jacques Villeneuve, by just, I think it was 2 points away. Unfortunately, he was disqualified and eliminated from the ranking for the season because he decided that the way to get ahead of Jacques Villeneuve was to just sort of drive into him and drive him off the road. And he drove into him and drove him off the road. Unfortunately, Schumacher retired and Villeneuve kept going. So Michael Schumacher was a great driver, a brilliant driver. I think a driver very much in the mold of Ayrton Senna because he was committed to win.
Yeah.
That was all. He got into the car, he wanted to win.
Yep.
And I think that it is very interesting to see what Jean Todt was able to do with Ross Brawn and Michael Schumacher in the years to come. It was just this sort of unity of team where you say you have a driver, and we can have great arguments about the current Formula One scene and certain teams that are built around a certain driver and find success. It's the way it is in Formula One. One of the great challenges for McLaren back in 1988 is that when you have the two best drivers in the world, how do you make that work?
Yeah.
And they were very fortunate, as Red Bull was in 2023, that no one else was anywhere near them.
Right.
So therefore, they didn't really have to deal with the inter-team rivalry.
Right, right. You know, in this period, you know, to use a metaphor for those who may not be up to speed in F1, this time the Bulls in the NBA were winning everything, right? But it took Michael Jordan and Scottie Pippen to fall in line with the team and help the team succeed. That was difficult in 1988 when you had two Michael Jordans on the same team. So I hope for all those who understand basketball, that makes sense in this scope. Michael Schumacher was the best driver in the world. And Jean Todt knew it wouldn't be a good idea to pull another Schumacher onto the team. So there was a level of hierarchy in a way, but it all worked and everyone really built that team well together.
I'm going to take a moment to also give a shout out to Eddie Irvine. Hi Eddie, I hope you're watching this video. Because everyone thinks of him only as Schumacher's number two. But again, it's important to remember that in 1999, when Schumacher had his accident at Silverstone, Irvine really stepped up, and he also came in second in the championship, only 2 points away from Mika Hakkinen, who won. So it was very much a team effort, although obviously centered on a single driver. But it's also very interesting, again, talking about Jean Todt. And this is such a great thing about this exhibition, the magic of Monaco, and Monaco's place in the world of motorsports. Because Jean Todt, of course, who was running Ferrari at the time, started his career as a rally driver and then as a co-driver. He was extremely successful, won the World Rally Championship as a co-driver 1 year, and in fact, in 1971, I think it was, he came in second in the Monte Carlo Rally in an Alpine A110, very much like the one we have in the exhibition.
Right.
So this show, these cars, the people, this is all about the magic of Monaco. It's absolutely astonishing. You know, my face hurts smiling just thinking about this exhibition, these cars. It's remarkable. So thank you very much for watching this video. We hope to see you here in the gallery on Bellevue Avenue in Newport, or here on the Audrain Museum Network or on the Bloomberg Connect app. Thanks very much for joining us. Ben, thank you for taking us down Formula One memory lane.
Of course.